One of the most common requests we get on this channel is to do more drawing tutorials. And so today I basically sat down for 2 hours and drew this, a robot in front of this kind of post-apocalyptic wasteland scene. And so I'm gonna go through the process sped up and talking on specific parts and highlights I do about how I color things in, add textures, do my backgrounds, come up with all the little details, all of that stuff. Just a walkthrough of my process. It doesn't get too much in the weeds of technical Photoshop tools and things like that, but it's more overall how I approach digital art, and hopefully there's something helpful for you. So let's get started. All right, so I'm here in Photoshop. I've got a pretty big canvas, 2500 by 2500, 72, that's okay. And the first thing I'll do is take my background, find a light gray color, something like that, and put it like that in the background, paint it using the paint bucket tool here. And the reason for that, if I make a new layer and go to a black brush and show that, or go to a white brush and show that, is that those are going to show up, kind of these two extremes are going to show up over top of the gray. A lot of times I'll sketch things in black or white or have shadows, and it's just an easier way to kind of see the, if something's going out of the lines or other things like that. So it's just a helpful technique I find. And I saw other people do it and it seemed like a good idea. So then the next step is to kind of have just a rough sketch of whatever character I'm going for. So I usually just stick with these normal hard mechanical brushes here, and we'll play around with them. But basically, I'll come up with an outline of what I want my character to look like. So in this case, let's say I'm making a robot of some sort, and so I'll just kind of really loosely sketch what I think that robot might look like. So let's do something like this, and give it some basic antennas. Just start to think of some ideas of how it could look. Maybe there's a little tube here. So when you finish that, you should have a nice rough outline of what you want your character to look like. You have at least an idea of kind of the proportions. And if something looks a little off, you can always take something. Like this head seems a little bit too big, I'd say. So I'm gonna actually just select it. I'm gonna press Command X on the Mac, that's Control X on Windows. And then I'm gonna go to Free Transform using Command T on the Mac, that's Control T on Windows. And then I'm just gonna kind of, while holding Shift, make the head a little bit smaller and do it like that. Maybe bring it down a little bit. So yeah, I'm just getting a sense of the proportions and how everything looks. Then I'm gonna bring this way, way down in opacity, something like 11% or something like that. And this will serve as my guide. And then I'm just gonna kind of go over top of that with more professional looking lines. So I'll zoom in here and let's do something like 16. So I'm just going over this and making, in the general area where this character is, making slightly cleaner lines for how I want this character to look. And for me, it doesn't have to be, super precise. It doesn't have to be like, this is a little bit bent. That's okay. Like that adds a little bit of personality, and I like the hand-drawn look for things. I don't like things looking perfectly polished and, straight. So I prefer kind of that hand textured feel, but your mileage may vary. So you can see while I am generally following what the guide is saying, I'm adding my own little flourishes as I start doing the line art over top of it. And so like these eyebrows, I just had rectangles, but I thought, maybe I'm gonna have them be a little bit more curved like this on the sides. And same thing with, I added a little dimension to the back of the head that wasn't there originally. So, as you're going through this, just think about what are the things that I could add to this to make it, give it a little more life or personality, or a little bit more refinement. And a lot of times I'll leave off little details. Like I know I probably want to go in with a smaller brush and do things like these lines on the neck or arms or things like that. So right now I'm just kind of outlining the main shapes, the main components of the character. And I can always come back and add those little details later on. All right, so that's looking pretty good. And if I, made my guide layer disappear, I can see I have a basic outline, parts that I can start to color in. I kind of think of this as like the coloring book phase. So over top of my initial draft, I'm going to start coloring in. I'm going to pick a bigger brush and just start coloring in some parts of this character. I'll usually start with just a gray of some sort to for a robot. But later on, we're going to be adding some more texturing to them. So this is just kind of putting down a base foundational layer. So all I'm doing is creating kind of these flat, basic colors for the character. So I might, use a more rusted red for the neck. Now these colors are definitely going to change. I'm going to probably add overlays and have an idea. Maybe I want this whole character later on to be hued, blue or green or purple or something like that. I'm going to do that later, but these serve as just a basic idea of how I'm going to start the character. And oftentimes the colors that I think are going to work best completely surprise me later on when I experiment with blending styles and textures and I come up with some new ideas. So I would play it kind of loose and quick and dirty at this stage. Just have fun with it and think about, just a basic foundational plate, and then we'll be able to build on top of that later. All right, so once that's looking good, I can usually turn off that back guide layer. I really don't need that anymore now that I've got the outline and the colors here. There are some details that maybe I want to reference here, like the lines on the screen or the buttons, but honestly, I think I'm probably better off just doing it on my own at this point. So the next thing I'll start to focus on are little details, and I'm going to make a new layer. I'm always making new layers of things and turning them on and off to see how it looks. A lot of times also I don't want the black line art to be 100%. I'll usually at least bring that down to 80 or 90 or something like that, so it's not super contrasty. And then I'm going to pick a smaller color. So I think I was using like a 16 pixel brush for some of this. I'm going to move to 5 pixel. I'm going to start to zoom in and start to focus on some of the finer details. So let's start to do some lines here for the neck, and I'll do little rivets for where the nails might be or something like that for this character. And what I love making really super detailed robot work where you can kind of see all the parts and buttons and pieces and how they all fit together. And so it's a really time-consuming process, but the end result I think looks really nice. And you think about maybe there's little buttons or scratches here. I never have a really set plan with this stuff. I just kind of draw and think about what might look good and try it. And if it doesn't, Control Z it and or Command Z on Mac, and it's okay. When I'm filling in the parts of a robot's, body, a big blank space, a lot of times how I'll start is segment it off into plates. So I think about how I might, how this thing was put together as these metal plates, kind of just put a bunch of shapes together and then do the, where screws or nails or dots might be, to just kind of give myself some bounding areas to work from instead of one big rectangle. And then I can kind of play off of those and add a lot more little details in there. And at this stage, I don't think twice about it. I just start drawing. So I'll do these multiple lines to make like a vent. I'll do little buttons, squares, triangles, and circles. I will create little meters. I'll think of different meters in my head, little bars or graphs or waveforms or things like that, and just keep drawing and keep playing off of the edges and the lines and whatever I can think of. So there you go. His body is now completely littered with little, a joystick over here, squares, numbers, music notes even, just a bunch of things that when you zoom it out, you really don't notice a lot of the small details, but all together they feel like, like you might see on a really complicated robot with all these little buttons and knobs and designs on them. A lot of times I'll also think about how the parts connect. So for example, these eyebrows, maybe these are somehow connected with levers to, the top of the head, or these eyes, maybe they have wires that somehow go to an area, over here, or somehow, this part is, this mouth is connected to some sort of processor box over here. I find that if you think about the different parts and how they might actually work or get powered or anything like that, you help yourself kind of fill in the different spaces and think about how these things might all work together. When you're making this stuff, you always have to hide little references to things. So for example, I'm a part of this design group called the Route 42. So I always hide a 42 in a lot of my stuff. I'll sometimes put a little red monster for Character Animator, the team I'm currently working on, to just be a shout out to that. So think of the things that you enjoy or other characters you've created or friends that you have, things that maybe are only going to be funny or only one other person is going to notice, but adds a little bit of fun to your character and little hidden detail. I love art that takes multiple viewings and really looking closely to see exactly everything that's in there. Okay, so we did the flat color stage, we did the detailed stage. The next part that I'll do is the shading stage. So the first thing I'll do is over top of everything else, I will get changed to black, pick a pretty thick brush, maybe 18, or let's do higher, maybe something like that. And I will just start to paint over the areas that I feel are away from whatever I decide is my light source. So let's say my light source is to the upper left over here, then I would just start adding things on the side of these things, the opposite side where a shadow might be. All I really want to do is give a sense of depth and dimension, and you're gonna really get that. That's really gonna come across when you start adding shadows and highlights. So I'm just gonna put it everywhere I can think of. And once you've done that, then just bring the opacity down to something that looks pretty good. Usually around 40 or something. That's looking all right. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing with white on the opposite side. And so this is where light might be, reflecting on the character or highlighting things. And so I'll add a little shine, a little white to the edges that the light would be facing. And then the same idea, bring the opacity way, way, way down. I usually try to be pretty subtle about the highlights, but you can kind of see them there. It adds a little bit of dimension to the character. Now, one other thing in the detail phase that I do a lot is add little details around the edges of a character. So maybe he's got, a little wire that appears here, or, on his back, there's little pipes, something like that. I'll just do little silhouettes of objects and things that might be connected to him, or maybe parts that are connected to each other. But it's a nice little touch, and it also makes the edges a little bit less defined. So, when you have all these things going around the character, little knobs and joysticks and wires and whatnot, it's not as, blocky, or the edges aren't as, just straight lines. It adds a little bit of more interest to them. Now it's time for texturing. So up until this point, we've had really flat colors, the gray, the white, the reddish pink of the arms. But I want this character to feel more metallic. So I went online and found a metal texture in a high resolution. And so I'm just gonna copy this and paste it over top of my colors. And then I'll take my flat color layer, so this one right here, that has the basic shape of my character. I'll use the magic wand tool, click the outside of the character, which means it should be taking everything that is not colored, and then I will basically cut that part out. So let's go to cut, and now only the metal is only showing over top of the colors beneath. And so I could first play with transparency and see if, that's the look I want. Or a lot of times I'll play with blend mode. Overlay is my usual go-to. That looks pretty good. It's a subtle effect, but it's not bad. But I might play around with some different ones and see what I like the best. Actually, I like that. Hard light is looking really cool. I like how the reds are showing up. And that's why, honestly, I picked a texture that wasn't just straight gray metal. I like when you have these little different color inconsistencies here, rust, because I think it adds a little bit of extra visual appeal and dynamics to the character. But you can see all the other things, the details, the shading, the highlights, all that stuff is still showing up with the character. It's just really adding a little bit of extra texturing to them. Now, one thing that I always do to any character that I create is do this little pockmark texturing thing where I just draw these little circles and imperfections in the character, and then I will bring the opacity down and just add, a little bit of extra noise to the character. I do this so much, in fact, that I've created davetexture.png, a PNG file that is just all of these, and I will copy it and paste it into basically everything I make. And a lot of times I will layer it multiple times to get this textured look. I might even scale it down a little bit. So I might, make it more precise or more, congested in a particular area. But I'll do kind of the same technique that I did for the texture, where I select that color, flat color layer. I'll do the same thing where I cut out everything else except the texturing that's over the character. So it's a small, subtle thing, but I feel like it's something I add. And so whatever your little extra noise that you add to your character is, feel free to play around with that and do that. And to save yourself time from doing it over and over again for each character, save a PNG file or PSD or whatever of your texturing process and lay it over top of whatever you create. Okay, so I want the screen to be to come out the middle here a little bit more. So I found this, I just searched for scan lines online, and I'm just gonna go in and erase the parts that I don't need, and then that's going to give it a little bit of extra glow to it, make it feel like it's standing out a little bit more as a blue display screen or something like that. And then I'll probably play with blending modes or bring it down. Overlay looks pretty good. Bring the opacity down so it blends into the character a little bit more. That's a big thing that I see is if things are too bright, they're really going to draw your attention away from stuff. Like I can already tell, like the waveform in his mouth, for example, it looks cool, but it's a little too bright right now. I think it's kind of taking over, and if I bring the opacity down, it's going to go into the background more, and the character is going to feel a little bit more coherent. When I was first drawing, I would make everything as bright and saturated as possible, and it just looks pretty amateurish and clunky. So it's better to kind of blend everything in. And yeah, there's color correction stuff you can do at the end, but at this point in the process, I'm thinking about that stuff a lot. And then I'll start to pick just random colors and color in little dots and pieces of my character. Just have this layer of just background color and elements. So little flashing lights, little parts. I just find things to color in totally at random and scattered. When I'm doing this for character animator, for animated puppets, a lot of times I'll have these be animated sequences where these lights will blink on and off. And that's always a nice little thing to do as well. So for this, it's more of a flat piece, final piece. So I'm just putting them all, wherever I want without thinking too much about structure. But yeah, in a real, character animator, animated character, I would definitely be thinking about that. For lights, I'm probably going to do the add blend mode, linear dodge. That gives it a nice little glow effect, which I think works well for this sort of thing. And, immediately you can kind of see that it's starting to feel like some lights are on him. All right, so let's pick another color, like a light blue or something like that, and do the exact same thing. I'll probably do this for 3 or 4 different colors as I go around the robot and kind of add a little bit more colorful diversity to him. Okay, so I like how that's looking. I think the eyes need a little work. I'm probably going to match the eyes with the bluish color down here, something that's kind of a lightish blue, so kind of all the lights are feeling like they're in the same color family. So I'll just kind of paint over those for now, and then yet again we'll play with blend modes and transparency to see what looks the best. Now here's a part where I feel like the rust is getting in the way of the eye. Like, I don't think the eye would have exactly this rusted texture. So what I might do is use the clone stamp tool over here. And let's pick something like, 100. And I'm just gonna clone stamp. I'm holding Option on the Mac to get a sample from another area, and then stamping over top of it the other area to get rid of some of that stuff. And again, this is just going because I felt like it was a little too distracting. I might go back and add a few extra shadows, like under the eyes. I want them to kind of feel like they're set on the face a little bit. So I might add a little bit of dimension outside of there. I kind of want the eyebrows to feel like they're floating a little bit. So I might add something there. I'll kind of go back and think, are there little, areas where I could add a few more little details of shadowing to, again, just give a little bit more dimension, a little bit more personality to it. So this guy's lines are currently at 85%. And again, if I brought them up to 100, you'll see it's much more stark. It's the lines really stick out a lot more. If I bring them way down, you'll see, you just kind of see the painted underneath, which is kind of cool, actually. I kind of do somewhere in between where I can see, the lines a little bit and see kind of where those edges are. But to me, this looks a lot better than going all the way up here. To 100%. I like, more of the blended blended look that this has given me. Now I got to think of a background, and a lot of times where I like to begin with backgrounds are actually video game screenshots. I'll search online for video games. Like for this guy, I'll probably search for like Fallout 4 or something like that, because that kind of vibe is what I'm going for. And there are tons of really cool screenshots that people have taken. And I might collage together several elements from, multiple games, or I could just take one and then I'm going to add my own style over top of it. So I'll show you what I mean. All right, so I found this really cool shot of this base that someone made in Fallout 4. You can make your own bases out of all these different resources that you find. I'm gonna have to get rid of the corpse over here, but that's okay. And all I did was kind of enlarge it and add it to the background here. And so now what I'm going to do is let's actually make the robot disappear, and I'm going to focus on making the background integrated with my own style. So what I mean by that is, for the robot, he's got lines all around him, and it looks really pasted on when I put him on top of this background because this doesn't have any of that line art. So instead, what I'm going to do is take him off and just start drawing over top of things with lines. So I'm doing this the same way that I was kind of doing some of the flat art and texturing stuff before. I'm just kind of finding the contours. I'm not being too precise with this, but I'm just giving it my own style. And whatever your style is, that's what you should do. So, if you like very precise lines, or you like, more of a watercolor brush look, or whatever you're doing, you should apply whatever you did to your character also to, your background element. And that'll just make them feel cohesive and not pasted on. I will admit this is a very time-consuming process. I would turn on a podcast. I would do something in the background while you are doing this, because it does take a while. But it's a fun process. It's very relaxing, I find, and the end result is pretty cool. So if I were you, I'd listen to some music, listen to a podcast, put Harry Potter on in the background, something like that, and just go to town. If the video game thing doesn't work, find a photo, or go outside and take a picture of a forest. Or I even have done a metal texture by taking an old baking pan and shooting it. A lot of times when I go to a museum or am traveling, I always have an eye out for interesting textures, and I have a directory, a folder in my on my desktop that just has a bunch of interesting textures, cardboard, paper, tiles that I saw on the ground somewhere at a coffee shop, and I will constantly reference and use those in my work. So, the next time you get dragged to an event and you think it's kind of boring and you're not sure what you want to do, look around for cool textures, because chances are you'll find something. Even the dirtier and grimier the texture, sometimes the better, and you'll know where it came from. No one else has to know, but it's a nice thing. I end up using a lot of the textures I found over and over again. Same metal stuff, same watercolor textures, same coloring. A lot of this stuff gets reused multiple times, so good to find what your favorites are and keep doing it. For stuff like shrubbery like this, a lot of times it's, you don't need to get so precise and do every individual blade of grass, right? You can kind of, a lot of times actually the technique I'll do is a bunch of little circles going around it to give it a sense of, there's this shrubbery or these different sized things. I tend to go a little messy with stuff like this, really fine detail stuff like this. I get the general outline. That's good enough for me. No one's complained about it yet, at least. All right, so overall, I'm pretty happy with how this is looking. I think it looks pretty good, and it definitely looks more in line with, the lines of my robot. So I might do a few extra things. I might add that metal texture that I had before. So, this is what I overlaid on top of my my robot. I might do the same thing for here. Maybe I'll rotate it around a little bit or do something slightly different to it, and then do an overlay. Just to give it kind of that same texturing and same feel. And that already makes the sky look a little more interesting and a little more coherent with, what this guy looks like, and not just, this basic blue. And then of course, I've got to add the Dave texture here. So I'm going to copy and paste that and add that around as well. So let's put it up there and down here. As a matter of fact, the sky, the blue is looking a little bit too blue for me. I kind of want it to feel a little bit more maybe orangish or apocalyptic. So I'm gonna use the magic wand tool with that selected, and just try to get a general sense of what those sections look like. I'm gonna make a new layer. Let's use the paint bucket and paint over everything. There's a few gaps that didn't quite work out, but that's okay. I'm kind of being loose about all of this. So I'll just color those parts in. So let's do an overlay now with that. That's looking kind of cool, kind of a purplish sky. Actually, I kind of like that. I might bring that down a little bit. That looks a little bit better to me. I'm gonna add some clouds too, which if you saw Evan Flamethrower, all I do is just do a bunch of circles and, and that's it. And then I'll probably transform and bring that down a little bit. Maybe move it over somewhere. And let's try overlay. Is that gonna look okay? Yeah, it looks pretty good. And bring the opacity down. Just to give something a little bit extra interest in the sky. I might do one in the background here that's a little bit smaller to give a sense of depth. All right, let's bring our robot back in. Place him down somewhere. I'll just put him at the bottom of the screen here. And then probably what I'll do is add one more layer over top of everything to give it one coherent color look. So in this case, I might do, let's try a blue. Actually, let's try a gradient of some sort. Blue to, I don't know, doesn't matter, orange. Let's try that. I'll try these little interesting color techniques and do a gradient fill there, and then play around with an overlay or something and see how that looks. I actually think it might look better if that's flipped upside down. But all this is doing is bringing the colors of the piece together. It's attempting to, instead of them feeling a little bit off, right? Your colors are never gonna match exactly in the background and the foreground. But if you add elements like this, this helps brighten everything up a little bit, I feel like. It's making it come forward a little bit, and I like how that's looking. And it's also making them feel a little bit more coherent, like they're going together a little bit more. And let's make the robot a little bit bigger, showing up in the foreground. I'm gonna cut off his legs, but that's okay. I also feel like with all the grass down here, I kind of want to sell that effect and make him feel a little bit more connected to the scene. So I found this ping of grass that I just found searching online. And so I'm just going to paste that in. Let's put that in front of the robot. Something like this. I'm going to make it a little smaller. But something that helps sell the effect that he's there a little more and combines you know, he doesn't feel as pasted on, I guess. I don't like how this is just cut off right here, so I might erase some of this to make it feel like it's a little more of a gradual curve. That feels a little bit better to me. Now I'm gonna play with hue and saturation because that green is really standing out, and I don't want that, so the color I'm seeing here is more of, actually that purple color is pretty cool, and that kind of matches what's in the background. So yeah, let's do some purple grass, why not? And then I'll just do the line art treatment over top of this as well. So that's a really small detail, but I kind of like it. I think it adds a little bit to it. I'm gonna make that a little bit bigger, move it over. I'm gonna desaturate this a little more because I still feel like it's coming out too much, a little too bright there. But I just wanna add a little bit more of this grass on the other side. So I'm gonna flip this around, make it maybe a little bit smaller, maybe one more time, and do something like that. There we go. Now I've got a repeated element, and hopefully you can't tell that it's repeated, but if you can, whatever. Okay, that sky is feeling a little too bright to me. I wanna, oh, that looks better. And the whole background is feeling a little, it's standing out a little bit too much, so I'm just gonna do this, put a black layer over top of it and just bring that down to something like 22 or something like 16. That looks pretty good, and that's gonna make the robot stand out a little bit more. And then over top of that, I can do cool little effects like do little blue dots that I can make, you know, stars or something like that in the sky. That's kind of cool. Overlay, not looking good. Add, better, bring it down. Now here's the thing, I could spend at least a couple more hours on this, just perfecting everything and making it all look, keep adding layers, keep trying out colors. For today, I think this is good enough. But you know, you can take this as far as you want. It's a piece is honestly never done. I will look at things that I've done, you know, years ago and say, oh, I wish I had done that, or that looks too basic. But you keep evolving as an artist and you keep getting better, and pretty soon those things, those techniques that you keep doing will become second nature to you, and you'll incorporate them in your work the next time. So my advice is just get out there and draw. Just keep drawing and getting better at this stuff. And I don't consider myself a fantastic artist by any stretch of the imagination. It's a hobby that I do on the side that I enjoy. I have a lot of fun from it, and it's very calming and relaxing for me. And hopefully you can find that too. All right, so there you have it. There's my robot scene, drawn with Adobe Photoshop using a Wacom Intuos tablet, and lots of little details and blend layers and fun stuff like that. So I hope this was helpful. Please check out some of the other tutorials I've done if you're interested in animating a character like this. Check out all the character animator tutorials that I've been doing on the site. And thanks very much for watching. See you next time.